because they were the leaders of the group. Dr. Kwon had just entered the cave when he immediately turned on his flashlight to shine around. The uneven rock edges gradually appeared before his eyes. The stalactites were several meters high and long. At this time? Mr. Dai mumbled next to Nyan, when I was little. I only caught you outside the cave. But I never went inside this cave. But now that I've gone inside. It's pretty beautiful. Isn't it? Before Mr. Dai finished speaking, Nyan had already crawled into the cave and happily shouted, "Oh! So beautiful! Why don't I know about such a beautiful cave in my hometown?" Mr. Dai tapped Nyan on the head and said, "You've never been into the forest. How would you know? And even if you did, you're not allowed to go in. I forbid it. Do you hear?" Little girl Nyan rubbed her head. Her voice sullen, showing her annoyance. She ran forward to talk to Dr. Kwon. She said, "Uncle Kwon, are you guys here for a tour? This cave is so hard to find. But you guys know to come here for a tour." The soldier walked away smiling and replied, "We are going to do research, not to travel." Swallow asked again, "You guys go to do research? But there's nothing but rocks in here. What's there to research about rocks?" The soldier replied, "Yes. Rocks have many important things to study. Do you know Hung Vuong?" Little Swallow replied immediately, "Who doesn't know about Hung Vuong? Uncle? Hung Vuong's death anniversary is on the 10th of March. And I'm the best at history. Uncle." The army praised, "Great. Then let me explain it to you in an easy-to-understand way. We went to find the ancient text left by Hung King. And that text was carved on stone. So we need to study the stone." Swallow exclaimed in amazement, "Oh? So that's how it is. On the way." Little Nyan kept chattering, causing Kwon to have to keep responding. Until they reached a bend in the cave. The smell of bat droppings was so strong that everyone had to cover their noses. But Kwon was the opposite. He shouted, "Here it is." His flashlight shone directly on a corner of the cave wall. There were bats sleeping soundly, their bodies hanging in the air, their heads facing the ground. Bats clung to the cave wall, forming a dark patch. Nyan heard Dr. Kwon exclaim like that and immediately asked, "What do you see?" "Uncle?" The soldier asked again, "Can't you see the writing? It's on the wall over there." Nyan shook her head. Kwon immediately explained, "Right behind the bats, where there are 3 bats huddled together." While speaking, Kwon suddenly stopped, his eyes wide open in surprise as if he had discovered a secret. At this moment, a rather young girl stepped forward. Her name was Shuen, who was also Nyan's lover. Shuen looked at Kwon and asked, "What's wrong? Kwon? Did you find something?" Kwon looked at Shuen and replied, 3 bats huddled together. Turned out to be not real bats, but completely made of stone. Look." Kwon finished speaking and pointed to the cave wall, where the bats were sleeping soundly. Shuen squinted his eyes and looked carefully before saying, "Yes. 3 stone bats. Strange. But you better not touch them. I found out that the bats in this cave are unusual." The soldier asked, "What's different?" Shuen replied, "These are not ordinary bats." "I suspect they are." Shuen was speaking halfway, when suddenly a voice interrupted hers. Mixed with a certain sound, "They are vampire bats." Vampire bats! All the remaining people in the cave automatically exclaimed strangely. They looked back and discovered that the person who made the deduction was Dr. Doe. A doctor of archaeology. After Dr. Doe finished speaking, he immediately stepped forward and pointed to explain, "This vampire bat is very bloodthirsty. They usually only appear in America. If they have appeared here, it must be for a very special reason." Dr. Kwon asked again, "So are they dangerous?" Dr. Dow replied, "Normally not. But there are some species of vampire bats that are very aggressive. In large numbers, they can bite people to death. So everyone must be careful. It's best not to wake them up." Dr. Doe walked closer to the 3 stone bats, and suddenly pressed his hand lightly into them. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Everyone was extremely panicked. And in front of them was a pitch-black stone hole that was just wide enough for one person to crawl through. The hole was about 40 centimeters wide. And no one knew where it led. The strange thing was that even though the ground was shaking violently, the bats seemed to have no idea what was happening, and were still sleeping soundly and soundly. Dr. Dow nodded to signal everyone not to say anything, and he himself immediately entered the black hole. Then, one by one, everyone followed Dr. Dow into the pitch-black hole that went deep into the mountain. As soon as he entered the black hole, Dr. Kwon cried out softly, "Oh my God! Fire!" Immediately outside there was a rustling sound, as if something was preparing to wake up. Dr. Dow immediately hid himself and glared at Dr. Kwon behind him. Everyone continued to crawl deeper inside, until they saw Dr. Dow's entire body go through once more and disappear behind the black hole. Everyone knew they had entered a new space. As everyone passed through the hole, a dark and narrow space appeared before their eyes. It was a stone room only a few square meters wide, with a ceiling height of 2 meters. Just enough for a person to stand. When they entered, a series of strange characters exactly like the fire characters that Dr. Kwon mentioned appeared at the same time. And they were extremely dense. Dr. Kwon lamented, "This project is so massive. It will take a whole year to research. To clarify all these words, it will take a very long time." Dr. Dow replied, "But it will clarify all doubts about a part of history that has been obscured for thousands of years." The rest of the group nodded in unison. At this moment, the space in the stone room was extremely cramped and filled with people. Dr. Kwon urged everyone to quickly take pictures of the documents and bring them outside to begin research. At this moment, Nyan suddenly exclaimed, "Oh? I'm in so much pain." Nyan suddenly looked towards Nyan, and saw that Nyan's hand had been bleeding profusely, her face pale and frightened. The man screamed, "Nyan? What's wrong?" Mr. Dai also immediately ran to help Nyan. Nyan leaned against a corner of the wall and sat down. Nyan whispered, "The hole in the wall. I just put my hand in. But the hole in the wall felt like a knife cutting my hand. It hurt so much." Suddenly Nyan hugged his head and screamed in fear, his mouth mumbling some unclear sounds. Nyan immediately urged and asked, "Nyan, what happened? Tell me quickly." Nyan kept holding his head and waving his hands, saying, "Uncle Nyan, I saw a woman. She was not wearing any clothes. She was just walking around everyone. Her hair was loose. Her neck was bulging with a bag like a frog. It looked horrible." Nyan kept whispering, then shouted some strange language throughout the room. Everyone standing in this narrow stone room suddenly sweated, looking around in turn to automatically confirm Nyan's words. But they saw nothing. Kwon urged everyone to say, "Okay." The footage is done. Everyone quickly leave here and set up camp. God knows when those bats will wake up. Everyone nodded in agreement. The leader jumped back into the dark hole. The people behind him followed him. Nyan lifted Nyan up by the armpits and said, "Come on. Let's go outside and I'll take you to the infirmary." Nyan shook his head and said, "I can't go. That woman won't let me go. She told me to take her place." Saying something like. Nyan asked, "What did she say? Can you repeat it exactly for me?" Nyan's face turned even paler. Then looked straight into Nyan's eyes, suddenly uttering a series of extremely strange language sounds. But listening closely, it sounded very much like local Vietnamese. But he didn't know which local Vietnamese language it was from. But it was so difficult to hear. Nyan couldn't understand a single word. Nyan frowned for a moment and said nothing more. He wondered if Nyan was delirious. But at that moment, Nyan automatically stood up and crawled into the black hole to get out. Seeing that, Nyan urged and said, "Yes. Try to go out. Once you're out, I'll take you to the commune health station." Because Nyan was in here taking care of her. Mr. Dai had gone out earlier, just waiting to intercept at the other end of the hole to take Nyan to the emergency room. Now, as long as Nyan could crawl out, Mr. Dai would take her to the infirmary for immediate treatment. Nyan kept crawling away. But Nyan did not realize that Nyan was not the Nyan of before. There was an indescribable sharpness in her eyes. She was also mumbling like a mad person. Blood continuously dripping from her mouth. Wherever she crawled, the blood dripped down, creating extremely strange ancient characters. Nyan crawled out after her. After crawling for a while in the small hole, he suddenly could no longer feel Nyan anymore. Nyan crawled too fast. She crawled as if she was jogging in this pitch-black hole. The man exclaimed, "Nyan? Take it easy. Don't push yourself too hard if you're tired, or you'll get exhausted." Nyan tried to crawl quickly to catch up. But when he got outside, he saw only Mr. Dai standing there. Before Nyan could even say a word, Mr. Dai asked immediately, "Where is the girl? Why didn't you let her go first? Oh my God! She's sick and you left her behind." The man said in panic, "Brother Dai. You're kidding me again. Didn't the baby just crawl out in front of me?" Mr. Dai said harshly, "I don't have time to joke with you. Now get out here so the girl can come out. Hurry up." Nyan crawled out and tried to explain, "You're not wrong." The baby suddenly became unusually strong and crawled straight out, crawling very quickly. "There's no way I could block one end. You block the other end and the baby would still disappear. It's absurd." Mr. Dai did not believe it. Pushed Nyan's hand away and then crawled into the black hole himself to verify. But a moment later, he crawled out with a frightened look and said, "Uncle Nyan, I don't see the girl. She's missing." But I was clearly standing outside, seeing everyone come out one by one, but I didn't see the girl. The impatient man said, "Maybe you accidentally mistook her for someone else. Now crawl out here and look for her outside." Suddenly, Nyan finished speaking and looked up at the cave wall. Then asked Mr. Dai in fear, "Oh my God! Where are all the bats up here?" Mr. Dai said, "Obviously when I was standing there. They were still sleeping there." Nyan also said, "I was standing here but I didn't hear any noise." As soon as he finished speaking, Nyan and Mr. Dai immediately heard a panicked scream. The shrill sound seemed to be someone calling for help in the middle of the night. Mr. Dai said, "Go out and see." Nyan nodded and rushed out of the bat cave. When he got there, he was extremely horrified to discover the bodies of 1 or 2 people lying on the ground. Their necks were punctured and something like tadpoles were constantly crawling out of their throats. Their faces were purple and they were dead. In the darkness, there were black shadows looming. There were also screams of people running away from the group echoing in the forest. Extremely frightening. Suddenly, in the middle of the screaming, a harmonica sounded in the middle of the night. Very pleasing to the ears. Hearing this, Lean shouted, "It's Nyan." Mr. Dai asked, "How do you know?" Reply, "This morning I bought him a harmonica as a gift. And all afternoon he practiced playing this song while walking backwards." Mr. Dai glared at Nyan and said, "So you hid from me that you let the girl learn music. After this incident I will deal with you." Then Mr. Dai ran towards the direction of the sound, muttering as he walked, "No wonder I kept hearing that music in the distance this afternoon. If I had known since this afternoon, the girl would have died with me." Mr. Dai's grumbling sounded like a whisper. But Nyan heard everything. He turned a little pale but said nothing. After a while, the sound of the harmonica suddenly stopped. Mr. Dai stood in a bush, looking out at the stream. At that moment, there was a naked girl sitting on a rock in the middle of the stream, humming something strange in ancient language. Mr. Dai hesitated for a moment before this extremely magical scene. At that moment, Mr. Dai was startled by a hand reaching out from the bush. The hand covered in blood. A whispering voice came from the bush, "Save me! Save me!" When Mr. Dai looked closely, he immediately discovered that it was Dr. Dao. The doctor was holding a blood-stained photo in his hand, with many words written on it. When Nyan ran to the place, Dr. Dao had already stopped breathing. Mr. Dai held the photo of the ancient inscription in the cave, trembling and unable to say a word. Nyan immediately snatched the photo, wiped all the blood stains on it, turning the photo back to the outside. He saw the rough translation of the ancient inscription in the photo, a naked humanoid demon with a bag around its neck. It sings in the moonlight sky. Be quiet and don't disturb it. Wait until it finishes singing and disappears on its own before leaving. If it discovers you, run away quickly. Above all, don't let it discover you. It will capture people's souls in the bag around its neck. Bao Hao Kwai roughly translated from ancient Hmong and Thai script. Nyan's hands trembled as he looked at the writings, then looked out into the stream. It was indeed a naked person singing, looking up at the sky. It was indeed a bright moonlit night. The only detail left was the bag around his neck. But he didn't know if it was true. Nyan quickly pulled Mr. Dai's head down, and hid behind a bush. Just in time, the girl turned to look this way. Mr. Dai groaned and wanted to say something, but Nyan kept covering his mouth to prevent him from screaming. Only when the girl turned away did Nyan release the cover on Mr. Dai's mouth. Mr. Dai gasped and said, "What are you doing?" Nyan said immediately, "What Uncle Dao wrote in here said that naked man is a ghost. Do you want to be captured by it? Read it." Having said that, Nyan gave the back of the photo to Mr. Dai to read. After reading it, Mr. Dai immediately shivered and didn't know what to do. He just asked Nyan, "So what do we do now?" Nyan said, "Wait. Wait for the demon to disappear automatically. Try not to let it detect you." At this time, Nyan looked intently at the girl sitting on the rock in the middle of the stream. She was singing while looking around everywhere as if searching for something. Every now and then she would turn her face this way. Through the gap in the leaves and the dim moonlight, Nyan was horrified to realize that on her neck there was a bag like a frog fluttering. Her face was blurry and her appearance was unclear. Nyan was so scared that he lowered his head to the ground, not daring to look any further. Just then, a terrifying scream suddenly rang out in the middle of the night. The naked demon who was singing suddenly stopped singing. Its eyes turned cold as it looked towards the source of the sound. A terrifying smile on its lips. Blinking once more, the demon had disappeared. Nyan only saw at the end of the stream. The demon was standing there, in front of a man with a startled face who was standing there looking at the demon. At that moment Nyan grabbed Mr. Dai's arm and said, "It's time. Let's run." Dai. While the demon was not paying attention, the two of them sneaked across the stream. When they had just reached the other side of the stream and entered another bush, the demon had returned to its original position. The man at the end of the stream had collapsed and died on the spot. Just like Dr. Dao. Nyan swallowed his saliva and looked back at the demon, only to see the bag around the demon's neck was heaving. The demon was also breathing heavily, looking happy as if it had just been satisfied. Its face slightly lost its haziness, then became hazy and misty again. For a moment, Nyan glanced over and felt that the face was somewhat familiar. After waiting for a while, the demon disappeared automatically. Taking advantage of this moment, he and Mr. Dai ran back to the village. Along the way, Mr. Dai was always scared and thought about Nyan and was afraid that something would happen to her. But Nyan was fine. She had come out of the forest the earliest in the group. When she met everyone else in the group who had escaped from the forest, Nyan and Mr. Dai were there. Mr. Dai was both angry and resentful. But he loved Nyan, so even though he was angry, he didn't say anything, just glared at her. In this expedition, everyone died. Only Xuan and Quan escaped. After asking around for a while, Nyan found out that when Mr. Dai and his brother were struggling in front of the black hole, the bats woke up. Strangely, at the same time, they all heard a clear singing sound. And the bats kept aiming straight for their throats and biting them. Everyone was so scared that they ran everywhere. Xuan and Quan were lucky to escape, because they still remembered the old route. But the others were not so lucky. All of them were either bitten to death by the demon bats, or their souls were taken by the demons and turned into empty corpses. Xuan saw Nyan and couldn't help but run to hug him right in front of Mr. Dai. Mr. Dai, in his tense state, saw that the two had started to openly have a relationship and was very happy. Quan was also shocked, because he didn't know that Nyan and Xuan were in love. Originally, after this incident, Quan still wanted to confess to Xuan. But it seemed that he had missed his chance. After overcoming such danger, the beauty would naturally have a very deep memory. And in the end, who was the one who protected her? Of course it was Nyan. So from now on, Nyan would forever be important to Xuan because of this kind of memory. After Nyan asked a little more about the work plan, Quan sighed sadly and said, there were a lot of dead people. But the information collected was not worth much. Look. I could only get 2 photos from Mr. Dao's hands. The rest were all lost in the hands of others. Nyan said, so tomorrow we go back to the forest to find them. We also have to bring their bodies back to bury. To get the rest of that information. The man said in panic, I wouldn't dare go in there again. Look at the sky now. It's almost noon. It would take all day to get in there and there's no traffic going in during the day. You can only look for corpses at night. But if you go in at night, what's the risk of encountering ghosts? Nyan nodded and looked back at the scene. Indeed. He and Mr. Dai had walked all night, and finally reached the edge of the forest after morning. He didn't think the journey would take so long. Perhaps he and Mr. Dai were so worried about Nyan that they didn't pay much attention to the time they spent together. After that time, Nyan returned to the city. Quan had to make a report on the disappearance of the whole group. Although he did not collect much information this time. According to the regulations, Mr. Dai was still entitled to 10 million VND as salary. When he received that amount of money, Mr. Dai was very happy and suddenly had the inspiration to send Nyan to music lessons. Nyan could not believe her ears. The next day, she was urged to go to the city to find Nyan's family to ask for shelter. Nyan happily agreed and arranged a private room for his niece. Nyan went to art school and after a few years became a famous singer throughout the city. She had plenty of money and started to buy her own house and car. She also bought enough land in the countryside for Mr. Dai. As a result, Mr. Dai, who was the poorest person in the area, now enjoyed a life of luxury because of his daughter. Success continued to come to his family like a stroke of luck. A lucky coincidence bestowed by God. But no. Mr. Dai and Nyan did not know that it was not luck at all but a disaster. An unnamed hidden disaster, at the end of the working day at the printing factory. Nyan suddenly saw a thin, emaciated man with a haggard face standing in front of the printing factory door waiting for him. When he got there, the man ran up to him and asked, "Nyan, do you remember me?" Nyan had no idea who that person was. That person patiently explained, "Oh my God. Don't you recognize me? I'm Quan. Dr. Quan from 2 years ago." Nyan slapped himself on the cheek as if he couldn't believe it. He said, "Are you Dr. Quan? Impossible. Why are you so haggard?" Quan sighed, pulled Nyan's hand and said, "Come have a meal with me. I have something to tell you." Then Quan just pulled Nyan's hand and walked straight. Nyan didn't dare to go against him and just followed. Quan led Nyan into a small beer house. Ordered a plate of boiled peanuts and 2 glasses of beer. Then told him to sit down. Nyan nodded and sat down on a chair. Seeing that Quan didn't say anything but just sat there drinking beer, Nyan absent-mindedly looked around the beer house. Then suddenly looked up at the TV that was showing brief news. And accidentally heard some very strange information. In the past few years, there have been cases of people dying from myocardial infarction in the city. The authorities believe that these are not natural deaths, but are deliberately staged. However, the culprit has not been found yet. People need to pay close attention to their movements at night. And if they see any suspicious signs, please report them to us via the hotline number. The news on the radio was playing continuously and Nyan was listening attentively when he was interrupted by Quan's conversation. Quan said, "Do you remember the fire characters we got from the bat cave in the forest near your house?" Nyan nodded and replied, "Remember. Because of that word fire, so many people had to die. How can I forget it in this life?" The soldier laughed bitterly and said, "After that incident, I was imprisoned for a year for negligence and also had my doctorate revoked." Nyan looked at Quan and sighed. A man at the peak of fame was like that. Why did he end up in this situation? He asked, "No way? That's not your fault." The soldier shook his head and replied, You don't know. It's because I couldn't tell the truth in the report. That's why it happened. Nyan asked in surprise, why can't you tell the truth? The soldier replied, why? Do you think they would believe you if you said you saw a demon? And that everything was caused by a demon? Nyan understood and said, that's why you chose to lie to go to jail. The soldier tilted his head slightly and replied, better than being locked up in a mental hospital. And it was only for a year. After a year out of prison I started researching again. Those same characters were in the other two pictures. And you know what? I actually discovered a secret. Curious person asked, what secret? The soldier looked around for a while. Then said softly, then the devil appeared in us. Nyan opened his mouth wide, unable to believe what Quan had just said. Without waiting for Nyan to say anything, Quan took out 2 photos from his breast pocket and placed them on the beer table. And then he placed 2 crumpled A4 papers on the table for Nyan to see. He pointed at the 2 crumpled A4 papers covered with words and said, look for yourself. It took me a year of research to find out this secret. Too bad. We were walking with the devil without knowing it. After listening to Quan, Nyan's hands trembled as he picked up the 2 crumpled A4 papers and read each word. At first, he was quite calm. But after a while, extreme panic erupted in his brain. He threw the 2 A4 papers covered with Quan's words onto the table and said, no. You're wrong. You translated it wrong. The soldier sneered and said, I know you understand. And you don't think I'm wrong? You even believe it. It's just that you can't accept the truth. Right? Nyan stood up angrily and left. On TV, the news keeps repeating the news about the recent cases of people dying from heart attacks that were staged, and urges people to report the suspects. Quan drank the entire glass of beer in one gulp. His face flushed red. He chuckled and looked at the bright red words that stood out the most on the 2 A4 sheets of paper. The ghost's servant can choose a substitute by exchanging a contract. That person must be someone who loves to sing. Only then can the ghost's servant live and exist among the living world, surpassing the category of only existing in a certain range. At that time, its evil power is endless. Quan looked at the A4 paper and immediately felt disgusted. Crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Nyan's mood at the moment was the same. Like a pile of scrap paper with thoughts. He looked up at the sky and discovered that tonight was a bright moonlit night. Walking through the small alley on his way home, he suddenly saw a woman's silhouette looming in a nearby alley. Nyan followed and discovered that the person was Nyan. The thought of what had just happened flared up in him, making him unable to resist following Nyan. Only to see the proud Nyan wearing a gorgeous dress. She was looking around as if she was on guard to see if anyone was following her, or if anyone had appeared in this deserted alley. Immediately after that, Nyan began to act strangely. She took off all the clothes on her body and threw them into a hidden corner. Now she was naked, and her face turned slightly hazy. Nyan suddenly reached out and peeled off a piece of skin from her neck, revealing a bag that was bulging like a frog in the hollow of her neck. Nyan was so terrified when he saw this scene. He did not believe what Quan had speculated, but now it was true. Because of Mr. Dai's previous prohibition, Nyan had traded with the demon in that very stone room. Now she had become a demon's vassal. A type of demon that caused fear thousands of years ago. Nyan's scream echoed in the deserted alley, immediately attracting Nyan's attention. She shouted, "Who is it?" Then her naked body slowly moved towards the direction where the scream came from. A terrifying sound rang out. And the entire black sky collapsed. Nyan collapsed to the ground and died. The next day, the station reported another strange heart attack. The killer was becoming more brazen in his actions.